The prison visiting room, as far as institutional environments go, it's unique. You figure some inmates go the entirety of their term, years or even decades, without seeing the inside of it. It makes sense. A lot of inmates go through their lives burning bridges, hurting the people they love. So no surprise that there's nobody that wants to travel hundreds or thousands of miles to see them, spending hundreds or thousands of dollars. For the lucky few who do get to go into the prison visiting room, especially if you get to go in there regularly, it's a memorable experience. It's like stepping into a new world. On one side of the door, it's all bare concrete, gray, except for the silver of the barbed wire and the black of the gun barrels that are always pointed at you. And then you step through the visiting room door, and it's like in The Wizard of Oz, where everything was black and white in Kansas, and Dorothy goes to Oz, and the Technicolor just pops. There's murals painted on the walls. The chairs have little cushions on them so that you won't be uncomfortable whenever you sit down, whenever you're used to sitting on nothing but bare steel. There's vending machines where you can buy like microwavable burritos and cold sodas, and there are people there who aren't inmates or guards. They're dressed in their Sunday best to visit the people they love. It's like stepping from a nightmare into a dream. I was miraculously fortunate, not through anything that I had done or who I was, but because I was married to a gift of a woman, my wife, who visited me every weekend she could. She built her life around being able to visit me. Whenever I was at Corcoran, I would be out there on Saturday and Sunday, the 2 days that you were allowed to receive visits, every single weekend. There were a couple of other inmates that were as fortunate. There were probably 5 other regulars that were out there every single weekend. And another dozen that were out there on a monthly basis. Out of 1,200 inmates on the yard, you can do the math and consider how few inmates actually make it out into that visiting room on a regular basis or at all. One of the inmates who was out there regularly was multimillionaire music producer Phil Spector, whenever I was doing time with him. His wife would come to visit him from LA just about every weekend, every other weekend we'll say. I don't know the specifics of how she got there, but it must have been expensive. I'd assume she flew, and he did not appreciate the visits at all. Generally speaking, their routine was that he would come out and immediately start yelling at her in his raspy voice. The quote that my wife and I would always hear to the point that we listened for it was, "Don't you understand? I'm in prison!" She would empty out the vending machines. There was a rule that you were allowed to bring $50 in quarters to buy stuff for the inmates. In retrospect, she must have been breaking that rule, because I recall her running to the front of the line and just emptying out the vending machine, getting all the good stuff to leave it in a pile on a table, and Phil wouldn't eat any of it. He'd hoard it like a dragon with gold. And I suppose the $50 or $150 was a very small amount of money to him. It was a lot to most of the other inmates in there, and forget the $50 or $150. If you've never went without an ice cream bar or a cold soda or a microwavable burrito for months or years, you can't imagine how frustrating it was to look over at his table and see this stuff just uneaten and eventually thrown away whenever there were so many people who really wanted it. But I suppose that's how you act whenever you're an artist that has been coddled his entire life to the point that he commits a murder and refuses to accept any culpability for it. There were rules in place. Whenever an inmate is interacting with another inmate's family, generally speaking, they are studiously polite. Because you never know how another inmate is going to take the way you interacted with his family, and there are some true monsters in prison. The last thing you want to do is unknowingly insult the mother of a serious killer. You don't want to insult anybody's mother, but you certainly don't want to insult the mother of a guy who has a knife that big just waiting for the next person who disrespects him. Phil followed none of these rules. His wife followed none of these rules. He was loud, which is impressive whenever you don't have any vocal cords. He was discourteous in that he kept that pile of food to himself. He would not be respectful of the little personal bubble that everybody has in prison, that you don't go within so close of them or their family. And he was really just a trial to be in the same room as. As I recall, his routine was he would come out, he would immediately start yelling at her, he would peck at food for about 15 minutes, and then, believe it or not, he would nod off and go to sleep. I don't know what was wrong with Phil's vocal cords, but I can tell you that it did not affect his ability to snore, because he would be snoring up a storm at the table right next to my wife and I as we were doing our visiting room stuff, holding hands, talking sweetly, playing a game of Scrabble maybe. And then he would give a little and snap up and go back to berating her. "I don't like it here, get me out of here!" For a couple of minutes, maybe eat another piece of fruit off of his tray, and then nod back off. And he'd do that for 5 hours at a time and then go home. I guess for a 70-year-old man, that's a pretty awesome visit, but it was a trial for all of the other people in there. The prison visiting room makes me think about what's really important in life, what money can buy. You figure Phil absolutely had somebody who came every weekend, or just about every weekend, and visited him, same as I did. And he had no appreciation for her whatsoever. And I'm not surprised, because his wife didn't seem to really want to be there. As I understand it, she was financially dependent on him, and this was part of the deal of their relationship. Conversely, my wife and I had very little money. Very little. We were not well off at this time in our lives. And, those visits were heaven. They were the best part of my term, and in some ways the best part of my life up to this point. Because whenever you're locked away behind bars, what you truly crave is the presence of the people that you love and miss. And you can't buy that. That's not something that money gets you. It's not even something that strength of character gets you. What earns you that is appreciation for the people in your life. And what loses you that is a lack of appreciation for the people in your life. So take a moment and be truly appreciative for the people who care about you, for the people who would be there for you if you needed them. Because the moment that you forget how important they are is the moment that you lose them, and it's the moment that you ensure if you do go to prison, you'll do your whole term without seeing the inside of that visiting room.